and welcome. For all of you who are watching, you're tuned into TMH, and this is our English Daily News. Our headlines for today: the Biden administration urged the implementation of a clear strategy for ensuring parties to the conflict in Tigray are protecting civilians. WHO urges immediate food, medical aid into Tigray, and continued presence and belligerence of Eritrea and the Amhara forces in Tigray region said to be litmus tests for the signatories' compliance with the cessation of hostilities agreement. As we move on to our main update for today, U.S. think tanks and human rights defenders urged the Biden administration to implement a clear strategy for ensuring parties to the conflict in Tigray are in fact protecting their civilians. Several U.S. think tanks and human rights defenders wrote a letter to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee Chairman Bob Mendez and Ranking Member James Risch. While we have seen progress through the recent negotiations, we remain concerned about the dire situations in Tigray, they said. They urged the senators to request from the Biden administration a clear strategy for ensuring parties to the conflict are protecting civilians and holding accountable those who have committed atrocity crimes. The letter said the agreement signed by the government of Ethiopia and the Tigray People's Liberation Front on November 2nd is encouraging, but caution is warranted, it said, adding that the agreement does not include parties responsible for substantial violences, notably Eritrean Defense Forces, and previous pauses in fighting have not endured. The letter stressed that to date, the administration's response to conflict in northern Ethiopia, as well as in other regions of the country, has been inadequate. Much more is needed to prevent harm to civilians and further atrocities, which have the potential to become a regional conflagration of enormous proportions, as it warned. The think tanks and human rights defenders also called for a stepped-up U.S. response to the human rights and humanitarian crisis within the country of Ethiopia. They specifically urged the Congress to hold the public hearings that compel the Biden administration to articulate its policy on Ethiopian and Eritrean policy, as well as including what steps the administration is prepared to take if these parties to the recent agreement fail to implement the necessary steps to protect civilians and in fact ensure humanitarian access. They also urged Congress to press the administration to urgently scale up U.S. support for atrocity prevention, documentation efforts which remain desperately needed if the recent agreement holds. They called for advanced legislation that make accountability for atrocity crimes a central component of future U.S. engagement with the government of Ethiopia and the Tigrayan authorities. They also alluded to heinous atrocities perpetrated against civilians and emphasized that the Ethiopian government, blocked on Tigray now in its 16th month, remains in place with a further tightening since fighting resumed back in August. The siege has also stymied the rehabilitation of the healthcare sector and the ramping of the comprehensive response to gender-based violence, as they said, indicating that in the most recent weeks, joint Ethiopian-Eritrean airstrikes and shellings in northern Tigray have caused civilian casualties and the death and injuries of humanitarian workers and even more displacement. They noted that the Ethiopian authorities have cut off internet, telecommunications, banking, and electricity services to the Tigray region for over a year now and have restricted access to conflict-affected areas for independent rights monitors and journalists, severely restricting available information on the situation in the north, including the harms being suffered by civilian population. They also referred to a recent statement by the U.S. Holocaust Museum that multiple warning signs of potential genocide are in fact present. We hope Congress can bring greater attention to this urgent crisis, as the letter concluded with. WHO urges immediate food, medical, and aid for Tigray to allow access in. The WHO called on Wednesday for a massive influx of flood and medicine into the Ethiopia's Tigray region, and following the ceasefire deal, saying that desperately needed aid has not yet been allowed into the region. The WHO Health Director, people in Tigray needed urgent assistance after 2 years of bloody conflict with access to the region severely restricted. The conflict between the government forces and the Tigrayan forces has plunged Ethiopia's northernmost region into a severe humanitarian crisis, with only a trickle of relief have gotten through. WHO Chief Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus welcomed the breakthrough ceasefire agreement reached last Wednesday, but warned it was already a week on and nothing is moving in terms of food aid or medicine. People are dying from treatable diseases. Many people are dying from starvation, as he told a press conference, and insisted that even in the middle of fighting, much needed food and medicine for civilians cannot be a condition. Especially after the ceasefire agreement, I was expecting that food and medicine would just flow in immediately. That is not happening, he said. He called for the reopening of basic services, such as banking and telecoms, and called for journalists to be allowed into the region because everything that has happened in the last 2 years has happened in the last 2 years completely in silence and darkness, as the 6 million people have been completely separated, shut off from the rest of the world as if they don't exist, he said. WHO Emergencies Director Michael Ryan welcomed the notion of a humanitarian corridor into Tigray, but said experience in other crises showed it was vital that the corridor remain both open and unrestricted. The people in Tigray need immediate, massive, overwhelming assistance now, he said, including not just food and health care, but also goods, commodities, plus the free movement of staff to deliver aid. Ryan said a drip flow of aid or help, but being turned on and off is not going to work. A week on from the ceasefire, we still remain on standby to take advantage of any opportunity to provide life-saving assistance to these people and there right now that need it extremely bad. As we move on to our next update, the UN says humanitarian partners are fully mobilized and waiting to get to the head of the resume supplying humanitarian aid into the Tigray region. Associate spokesperson for the UN Secretary General, Stephanie Tremblay, made the announcement at a press conference in New York City yesterday. Let's take a listen.
Us and our humanitarian partners are continuing discussions on resuming aid and also personnel convoys into Tigray with the relevant sides. And, the humanitarian colleagues are all mobilized to provide food, nutrition, health, and water treatment supplies once the approval to go ahead is granted. And in the meantime, our humanitarian colleagues are telling us that humanitarian access across northern Ethiopia has improved due to the cessation of hostilities. And, we had an update on that, I think, on Friday. So I can just reconfirm that our partners, they have started to provide assistance to people. But of course, we're, as I just said, we're ready to provide more because we know that the needs there are immense.
Continued presence and belligerence of Eritrea and Amhara forces like Fano and Tigray said to be the litmus test for the signatories' compliance with the cessation of hostilities agreement. Conflict analyst Abdullahi Boru Halaki told SABC that there are many landmines in this agreement. Let's take a listen.
The cessation of hostilities was between TPLF and the Ethiopian government. They are not the only warring parties. There is Eritrea, and there is an assortment of militias from some of these communities or regions. They are by no means bound by the cessation of hostilities. So I think that is one of the key tests again in the next coming days and weeks. If any of those are non-aligned, that means Eritreans continue fighting as they have been fighting in some pockets in Tigray, or assortments of militia groups like Fano continue fighting, that will create more problems. Never mind, the question of Western Tigray has not been part of the cessation of hostilities to begin with. So there are multiple landmines in this cessation of hostilities. And the next few days, weeks and months, but particularly the deadline of 30 days since the signing of cessation of hostilities for DDR will be incredibly critical because it will give us a good roadmap of if other parts of the cessation of hostilities, I think it's around 12 articles, are going to be respected.
Halaki stressed that any slip back to the pre-agreement scenario will be catastrophic not just to Tigray, but the entirety of Ethiopia as a whole. As we move on to our next update, Tigray People's Liberation Front and Ethiopia's government have made peace. A German newspaper, TAZ, published impressions from Ma'ala, the capital of the region, under the title Tigray After the Peace Agreement Between Trauma and Hope. Timnit Bayru presents the story.
Tigray's deadliest war has massively damaged the people. Many people are dead. Many have been forced to leave their homes and have been living in makeshift camps and abandoned school buildings for the last 2 years. Since these people once had an income, they were farm owners, traders, farm laborers. Their homes, their property, their crops, their money were looted by Eritrean army and Fano militias from Amhara. Mama Tsaga was displaced from Hamara in western Tigray 2 years ago when heavy artillery bombarded her house. She escaped in a tractor and on foot. I saw mothers, children, and young people dying under shelling. We walked over the bodies of my relatives and neighbors, says the 62-year-old crying. It took over a month to reach Maala, a blessed city. The people inside Maala have a good heart. At first, they came so often and brought us food, clothes, shoes, mattresses, blankets, cookware, and everything. We are still alive because of the people in Maala. They still share their food with us, even though they don't have enough themselves. I am so grateful. I still mourn the dead and my relatives, whom I saw 2 years ago. I don't know where they are now. Are they alive? Are they dead? Are they in prison and being tortured by the devils? I have no idea. The old woman keeps crying. She says she can't wait to see her relatives, her house, her hometown. The effect of war is cruel. Mama Silas told mourners the deaths of at least 19 children who died when a jet bombed a kindergarten on August 26. She lived with her 12-year-old grandson, Abil. Mama Silas recalls, that cursed day I was in the market, and we heard the sound of the jet and the people running around, and then there was a loud bang as the bomb fell. When I asked where, they said, in my area. I left my stuff. When I got home, I saw a lot of bodies torn to pieces, lying all over the place. Mama Silas cries loudly. She needs to calm down before she can continue. Then I saw my grandson's clothes. If I was only in his place. My God, if I only died before him. He was my daughter's only son. Why did God allow this? They were innocent children, with pure hearts. They were just playing. Abi the devil has our children's blood in his hands. I don't think he wants peace with us. He was never a man of peace. He was a butcher. He never gets enough of our blood. I don't understand why the world can't listen to us. Aren't we human? The peace agreement of November 2nd between the TPLF and Ethiopia's federal government has relieved many people, but it has also caused heated arguments among Tigrayans. But one also sees smiles on many faces and reads hope in them. The uncertainty of survival now seems to have diminished somewhat. This is because there's no longer air raids in Maala every day. Children have been playing outside again for a few days and are eager to go to school uniforms and get to school. But as soon as they hear a noise, a car, a motorcycle, even a wheelbarrow, they panic and run inside. Gannet worries about her husband and her parents, but is hopeful about the prospects of peace. If the peace deal is real, it will be like a rebirth for me and my family. I can't believe we conquered the death that lurked at our door. I can't believe we are going back to life and peace. When I think of the boys who died for us, I break. Many families have been separated since the beginning of the war. Individual relatives went to Addis Ababa or abroad to see a doctor and could not return. Or children went to relatives and have not seen their parents since. My dad will come home. He will bring me biscuits and chocolates and clothes. Samira quotes her youngest son, who does not remember his father, as saying, her husband is in Addis Ababa after traveling there for health reasons. We had a big house and a nice life. Today I have a small house. I have sold my sofa and TV and my jewelry. Now I sell tea and coffee on the street so that my children can eat, she says. I worry about my husband. I heard Tigrayans have been arrested because of their ethnicity. Ever since I heard about peace, I can't sleep. I want to see my husband again. I want our life. As news of peace spread, some prices fell in Maala. But the people are still dying. They are starving. They cannot be cared for. They have no money. And outside of Maala, there have been more attacks, mainly caused by the Eritrean army. Eritrea neither wants to break the peace agreement and conquer new territories, or wants to plunder, rape, and commit atrocities. In the areas under their control, Adwa, Shira, and other small towns, the EDF steal cars. They also go into every house and take what they can. They burn crops. They bring things across the border into Eritrea. Last Saturday, a war victim from the Daga Arbi reported in the hospital in Maala that the city has been bombed until Friday. Because the Eritrean and Ethiopian army are fighting together, it is not clear whether the Ethiopian Defense Force is also not committing assaults. There was artillery shelling on Abiy Adi until November 4th. There were heavy attacks on Adigrat until November 3rd.
Thank you, Timnit Baru, and welcome back as you guys are still tuned into TMH's Daily English News. Moving on to our next update, Ireland says EU cannot let genocide go unpunished. Ireland representative at the EU said genocide has taken place in the Tigray region and that the charge is laid at the door of the Ethiopian state. Let's take a listen.
President, I want to address the issue of the recently announced peace deal in northern Ethiopia. While it was announced 7 days ago, there's still no humanitarian access to Tigray. The question I want to raise is impunity. Many experts have given evidence that genocide has taken place in Tigray. Crimes committed by the Ethiopian National Defense Forces amount to genocide, an attempt to destroy the Tigrayan ethnicity. Of course, there has been violence on all sides, but only the charge of genocide is laid at the door of the Ethiopian state. Genocide is a crime of universal jurisdiction, so that any member state has the capacity to investigate, but I'm not filled with hope. My own country, Ireland, was the only one to denounce the Ethiopian regime forcefully and was targeted and threatened and subject to diplomatic expulsions. Our first priority must be humanitarian access and sustaining the peace. But surely the European Union cannot let genocide go unpunished in 2022. Thank you.
Our final update for today is the children of Tigray speaking on how they feel this ongoing conflict has affected their education, plus their message for the international community, compiled by Tigray TV. Let's take a listen.
Termination of education for 3 years leaves students in Tigray desperate.
Before the war, I was grade 10, and I want to be a fashion designer.
I was grade 10 3 years ago. I wanted to get into medical school and become a doctor.
I was grade 10 before the war. I wanted to be a psychiatrist. I wanted to learn either marketing or business management, so that because I wanted to be a businesswoman.
These are the voices of students in Tigray that have had their hopes crushed because of the war. Schools in Tigray were closed following COVID in 2019, but the war that broke out in 2020 would mean no education for millions in the region.
At first, when school was closed, I believed that it was going to reopen in a few weeks. And I remember I was doing some reading and still keeping my preparation. And I was even buying exercise books and pens, a lot of things. But the war broke out, and in time, I remember losing hope.
Like, I had dreams. I had a lot of things to succeed, but I couldn't do one of them because of the situation. People are dying out of starvation. People are dying out of lack of medications. So for me to be talking about school is a little bit of fantasy, but it shouldn't be, obviously. So I feel sad because I would have been making a progress to make my dream come true.
As basic necessities remain blocked from entering Tigray and communication blockout has made it difficult to get the help, the students said that they're among many affected by the siege.
The siege actually affects my life totally. I mean, my life is totally different now. It's not as it was. You can't just do whatever you want. You can't go to your friends. I mean, you feel insecure. We're just eating foods from the aid agencies, so it's not as we want it.
I believe that it disconnected me with the world and with everybody out of this region. I thought and I believed that I had little probability of surviving this situation. So the biggest thing that it did for me was that it took my hope away.
You know, it's really heartbreaking to see your classmates, your peers, your friends begging out there on the street, starving to death, you know, suffering due to lack of medicines and due to different factors. And it's really, I don't know, it's very hard. And, you know, I feel like as we're having a huge psychological crisis and social crisis now, and you see them, you know, filled with despair, unable to see even a ray of hope. And it's, you know, horrible. Like back then, you can't choose what to eat. And it's like the basic necessities have become to be a fantasy these days, right? It's like you eat whatever you got. It's not like you could choose. It's not like, you know, you can't have whatever you had back then right now. It's like it's so awful that we had to do this on the 21st century.
The students also said that the war has altered their life permanently as they remain terrified of the constant shelling as well as drone and aerial strikes in cities and towns of Tigray.
The first time I saw jet, I kept telling myself that it would just going around. It's not gonna kill everybody or anybody else for that matter. But the people died, and I was afraid. And the second time it came, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to protect myself.
Whenever the drones come, I just, I don't hide actually, nowhere to hide, but all I can do is praying to God to save us and to bring us peace.
It was shocking. First, I felt like as if it's a dream, and then, but it's true.
Since I've never experienced such a thing, first it was the noises they made. It was the sound that used to terrify me. But every day today it started killing a lot of civilians, right? All we see is bloodshed everywhere. So it was horrifying. I didn't feel like we could ever hide from anything.
The students finally shared the messages to the international community.
I do hope that they will facilitate in the restoration of our schools, the buildings that have been destroyed, and any other educational equipments, but mostly the psychological helps that they can give to students, because we've been away from school for so long and experiencing a lot of traumatic experiences, and I do think that we need that. And personally, I would have been a freshman in college, but now I'm sophomore year, so it's kind of painful to think about it. So I would also hope that they would give us the lessons in an effective way that will make up for the years that we've lost.
I hope, to get back to schooling process, to get back to the normal life. Now, everybody isn't living. I don't know. Sometimes it's a miracle, right? How are we surviving? There is a big cost in my mind. It's impossible. No one deserves to live in this such a condition.
I think there are some questions that needed to be answered first. And after that, I would gladly want for the school to be opened and to go back, meet our teachers. And I hope everything will be all right.
To be sure that everything is settled down, and I want to pursue my dream as I used to do. I want to pursue my education.
That concludes our news for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Bye-bye.